Economic Development Committee. I'm John Weddleton.
Dick Training.
Actually,
Pete Peterson.
hold on a second. We
Yeah.
have a new routine.
Yeah.
Mandy's going to do a roll call and see if we have a quorum.
So this is for quorums because this is the only committee that can recommend action on items, and so we're going to do roll call at the beginning of all of the meetings to make sure there's a quorum so that we're legal.
Where's Eugene?
Why do you ask for things like that?
Mr.
This
Weddleton?
springs from something that he recommends. That was a good suggestion. So,
Mr.
here.
Weddleton? Mr. Trainee?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Ms. Domboski? Mr. Constant?
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. So let's go ahead.
Forrest Dunbar.
We're going to do introductions for that.
Debbie Roll.
Nick Miller.
I'm Jake Warden, Chief Retail Officer at Canabasca.
Lorenzo Gonzalez, CFO of Canabasca.
Smiley Warden, owner of Canabasca.
Jan Olsen.
Rich Fern with Municipal Acreage.
Natalie Wilson, Municipal Acreage.
Dean Gates, Cynthia Kempson.
All right, thank you. So the agenda today, we'll have a report from Rich, and then on old business, we're going to move B to the end. If anyone's okay with that. To the end of segment 3, old business.
Complaint.
Wasn't here yet.
Okay. So are you, so Dean's printing out something for the light?
Yes, but we have the handout for the land use enforcement report if you wanted
We'll start
to.
there.
Yep,
You
go
can
over
get
that.
Okay. Okay, so Rich, you want to, land use enforcement on the last sentence?
Yes.
How's it going over there?
Good. I think, we conducted a regular licensing inspection to include the interior, and there were no deficiencies, and we've done, we've documented 2 exterior spot checks on odor and haven't detected an issue with odor outside the facility at the property line. So we hope the issue's been resolved. And we'll continue to do the inspection on a monthly basis.
So we have this summary report. What's the next 2 pages here?
That's our inspection checklist that we do with each. We have a specific checklist for each type of facility, cultivation facility, retail, and manufacturing. So I just included the checklist that Kevin Collins completed when we did the inspection.
Okay, so you bring this was done on October 23rd, and this is just, you just checked, and you have this, these are just the steps you go through.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Well,
Speaks for itself, it's fine.
It was good.
do you want to speak for a moment? I mean, it's nice, no odor problems. That is an
I'm just
ongoing
so
issue.
concerned to say the wrong thing. And well, thank you this morning for everybody. Just wanted to say that it's been a big challenge for us, but we did it. And I know we changed a lot. Majority of my people got let go, and I did hire a new CRO for the retail side of it, and he is gonna probably be in touch with you guys more than myself. You get to know him. His name is Jake Warden.
It looks like the waste problem was resolved too, and these guys have been doing double checks around the dumpster just to make sure that nothing is being dropped on the ground and everything's being Butch pointed out in his land use report, so,
It's behind a fence now.
yeah, it's got a big fence.
Yeah. It's about an 8-foot fence.
Is that a new fence that you constructed?
Yeah,
Around the whole back end of the property.
and the waste is behind it.
Everything.
So, yeah.
So then odor had been a problem too. Did you do things to change that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We bought a giant stick of deodorant for the building, pretty much. I don't know how to explain it, but that's exactly what it is. I know it sounds funny. But it helps a lot. It rips through the air. It's not ozone, it's just a big giant essential oil that just kind of vaporizes into the air and controls bacteria and smell and stuff like that. Two. Yeah, we have 2 of them.
They're pretty big.
Yeah. And they seem to work the best.
Okay, well, that's great. Thank you. Anything else?
Well, the cultivation side is still shut down right now, correct?
No.
Oh, no, it's back out. Okay. Okay. Good.
Okay. All right, well, thanks, Rich.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, because the cultivation side was shut down for a month, did that cause shortages around town?
Well,
Yeah.
not shortages to these guys. They normally sell within their own retail anyways, because they're on one of the busier, streets on Tudor, so they
Right.
normally just feed their own retail. So, I mean, they've lost tons of revenue, business has substantially slowed down for them. All the bad press really took a bite out of their flow. In fact, most of my clients told me when these guys were going through their issues that they saw a 10% bump in their own retail sales. Yeah, so it really had a big impact. But slowly but surely, they're getting the clientele to come back and build back up.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Dick? Or?
I guess, could you remind me again the dates that you guys were closed down, the cultivation was closed down?
October 20. No, September 23rd to
Yeah.
October 20th.
No, September 22nd, I want to say.
24.
So that was actually what I was getting at, is when this was done on the was it done on the 23rd, or was it requested on the 23rd? It says request date 23rd, report date 23rd. So this was done, this inspection was done while they were still closed, is that correct? Is there,
It was the day before we were open.
okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you're getting at what I'm getting at. Is there any difference in, and this is not being accusatory at all, I'm just curious how it operates. Is there any difference in sort of the output of potential odor when you're operating versus when you're not operating?
So the only difference of what the suspension on cultivation did was that we couldn't transfer products, right, from the cultivation to the retail. So they were still able to care for the plants. And remember, we talked about it was okay for them to cut down plants when they reach the maturity. Otherwise, they could seed out or do other weird things. And so it's the same smell burden, I would say. I can't really think of why they're being increased other than just not moving the dry product over to the retail for sale.
And so this inspection comes from the approved AR for their renewal that was inserted that they would have monthly inspections. So you'll see these once a month here, just kind of checkups as the follow-ups from that.
Good. Thanks, Chris. Anything?
Nope, I'm good.
All right, thanks. Okay, so moving on, transfers of licenses. Dean, did you? I'm sorry.
Oh.
Dan?
Was that one was moved, or was it?
Well, let me move B.
Oh, it's B, okay.
So A.
So we're on A. And we looked at this, I think in May. Looked on it a bit. And we introduced what you have in your hands now last week to be on the agenda for Tuesday and
Wednesday.
Wednesday, thank you. And Dean and I have kind of looked at it and recommended some changes that mostly just clarify things. Did we get copies of that?
Yeah, actually, Mr. McLaughlin is printing them now. He'll bring them over shortly. So they'll come in some side.
We can just discuss this generally then, but I want to go through the one with some, it doesn't show clearly the changes, it's me with track changes and Dean has some comments on it. And to see if those changes are acceptable to go forward as an S1.
So we have additional changes beyond what's already on
This
here?
is what you've already seen.
Right.
It's moments away, so we could maybe move on to maybe C. if you want.
Waste disposal requirements?
We've lost Mandy.
Chris, do you have we have some handouts here on the waste disposal.
Yeah, I don't actually have them. If you want to email them, I'm at my computer.
I'll try to email those
Did
to
you
Chris
email?
now.
Do you have this? Do you have this?
I think so.
Okay,
Yes.
Dean will try
I
to
will
do
find
that.
Mandy's email.
This was, we had just a general discussion on should we make changes. So this is basically the code related to waste disposal.
You need to change the code to reflect the state change in the rules.
That's what I thought this was here.
You know, I think that was part of it, but also there's, you know, metal lids now, better locks, enclosed in a fenced area, things like that that we might consider. You know,
Do you think we want to put that in regulations?
I don't know. We just, I mean, because that wasn't clearly the issue.
Right.
With last consent, so it just came up, okay, what's out there? And I got an email from, haven't responded yet, it was last week. Someone with auto parts, I think, or something, sounded like his company does auto parts, but he said, I hear you're looking into ways for better waste disposal. We make a lid for dumpsters. Are you aware of some aftermarket lid for dumpsters?
We got
Or for securing them?
Now it's this big, flat, really secure steel lid that came after the issues that happened. I don't know if anything's more special than that.
Is that provided by the dumpster company?
Yeah.
I think it's more expensive.
It's not a standard.
It's not
by-
standard, no.
Okay, so maybe the person who contacted me is the one who makes that for them. Because I think I saw a picture that had a metal thing and it had a smaller door for
Yeah.
throwing stuff in.
Yeah, that's what we use.
It's something similar to
Like
that.
on the top.
On the top instead of the side.
Yeah. It's a smaller door, but it's all metal.
Mr. Chair, I believe some of those were manufactured as tear resistant
Right.
containers, and I think they just
That's right.
transfer around nicely, I guess.
There you go. And who provides those then? Is that, I mean,
I think Alaska Waste.
where do they get them?
I'm not sure, I'm not certain.
Make a note for that for the bears.
Yeah, bears is fun.
Okay, so we're-
That's only on the big dumpsters, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so, well, do we have any thoughts on this? I mean, do you want to move, what do you want to do with this?
When you
Just kind
said
of-
roots in here, every root's been taken off by
Yes.
the state, so do it in
Where
there.
do we-
If you look on number 1 on B1,
Right. Including roots, it says
the
right
roots
there.
even need to be in here. They don't have any THC in them.
No, no use for
Why
it.
have any regulations related to roots? The state
The
doesn't make
state
rules.
regs just became effective, so it'd be nice if whatever we did.
When does the state become effective on roots, or are they already?
It's already
They're already
effective.
effective, yeah, I think on the 20th.
So you don't have to track roots or
Something
anything
like
at all?
that, yeah.
Johnny says the state's already gone effective on the roots, so we don't. That'd be tracked.
Okay, so that's one. So, what are
Mr. Chair?
Chris?
Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed this because it's a little bit quiet coming out of that room, but did we find out if the state did finally approve the regulatory change that allows the root balls to be thrown out and what we're going to do to deal with that?
You did not hear the head nodding when that question was asked, so yes.
Okay.
We got confirmation, Chris. I'm sorry you didn't hear the head rolling around from your area.
And so what's our intent on that?
Oh, well, I think around the table, I think that should be taken out from city code. What's your
Right.
thought?
Thank you.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, we could, I mean, I'd invite Nick and maybe Dan or something to the table, just so it gets recorded better, or someone else. If we look at different ways to handle waste, I mean, could you recommend anything? I mean,
I like that you guys have incinerator on here. The state doesn't allow for incineration. I wish it would. It makes sense. Because you could take it to like that old Fort Fur place downtown. They've got an incinerator underneath. But it doesn't, it's actually not in compliance with the state law. But that could change.
could you point me to that word?
It's on D2. Non-compostable materials, including paper waste, cardboard waste, plastic waste, or oil when the materials mixed and delivered. I guess it's fine because it's now mixed but not ground to a permitted solid waste facility or incinerator. It seems kind of off from what the state law.
When the state, it will change their laws.
Why doesn't the state, I'm asking Jed Smith, who's joined the meeting here, why doesn't the state allow incineration?
It's a board call. I know that it's been discussed, but they haven't developed any language that allow for incineration. It was also on the board.
Oh, Nick, you're on the board.
Yeah, I personally, I believe it's due to the odor. You know, the discussions that have been going on have been more about taking the waste and putting it directly into the incinerator, not being mixed on people's properties, right? A lot of cultivations, especially in the more rural areas, have incinerators of some sort that they already use for their trash. And I think, from my perspective, I think we're more concerned about the odor of, you know, someone burning just, you know, marijuana that's been cut down and not really mixed with waste. Once it is mixed with waste, and if you deliver it to a landfill and they incinerate it, that's really up to them, because at that point it's not regulated anymore. So, and I think that's where you're at down here in D2. It says if you take it to a permitted solid waste facility or incinerator, at that point it's normal trash. So I think it could stay in there just because it's normal trash.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's because it's mixed material. Yeah. So that's the key.
Yeah, that's the key.
Talked about updating it. Did you guys already talk about updating the routes?
Is there
The state change?
I mean, we haven't had a huge amount of problems that we're aware of with, you know, trash. But we hear people are breaking into dumpsters. I mean, it's not just at Lots of Sense, but we know other places probably as well. It is, from your side, Rich, is that an issue?
I've not heard it being an issue, and if the code is followed, the material is made useless by the time it even leaves goes outdoors to the dumpster. So we haven't had reports of dumpsters being broken into, other than Alaska Central, the early days there. But otherwise, we're not well aware of it being an issue.
Well, even if they break in for a little while, I mean, if people are, it's what Rich just said, if people are properly following this regulation, then over time, people are going to learn there's nothing there of value, and you know, they'll stop doing it.
Yeah.
I was just going to give you some input. We have a store on Fifth Avenue, and I would say the first month and a half we opened, we were chasing people out of our dumpster. But it really, you know, the instances have gone to maybe once a month, someone will go pull a couple bags out and obviously not find anything. So it seems like they're learning there's nothing there, so they're stopping. And don't get me wrong, we put a gate on ours too, right? To at least make them put a little effort to open that thing. But I'd say the first month, you know, we had a couple instances, and then now I can't remember the last time. It's maybe once a quarter. I assume that's what they're doing. I'll come in and there'll be a couple trash bags laying in the parking lot. We'll pick it up, throw it back. But
How are you getting in?
How are they getting in? Well, right now they're climbing a fence. We have a wood fence around 3 sides and then a gate in the front. Right now they're just climbing in, and if you pull on the lock part really hard, you can flip the top open. But you know, it takes some effort. But I think they've learned over time that there's just nothing there, so they stop.
Do you have a regular plastic lid?
Yeah.
So have you thought about getting the metal lid?
I haven't. We own a retail store there, so.
You really don't know much.
Yeah, and you know, it's a high traffic area. We're just up over the hill, and right along Juno and Fifth, so we get a lot of traffic through that area. So, like I said, I can't remember the last time someone actually pulled trash out.
And you said you get a lot of traffic, so you think there's eyes on your business preventing people?
No, I had a lot of walking traffic coming back and forth from down over the hill at beams and stuff.
So you're very vulnerable.
Very.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And you still don't have a huge amount of trouble.
No. I think they've learned just, you know, after a while, you keep looking, can't find anything, they just stop.
We don't have a requirement that you put a sign that says there's no usable marijuana product in this store.
No.
Is anyone doing that?
I haven't seen it.
No. Okay, so we have takeout routes. Anything else on this? Chris, any other thoughts?
Nope.
Okay. Thanks. You want to move forward with that then and have that? Okay, so we have Dean. Dean, can you modify the rules just to take out including routes in B1?
B1, yeah. So we need another ordinance to do that. Or B1.
Right.
Yeah.
And just to make it conform with the state.
Just no longer, stays longer tracking, which is easier to get rid of it.
We might have a bunch of changes to conform with a bunch of state regulation changes, right? They might have like an omnibus ordinance doing this as well as other changes to conform to state regulation updates.
So if we waited a month or two, if the state's doing different changes, we might have a bunch of changes for that. So if this waited a couple months, is this a problem?
I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, because we have a bunch of changes coming, like cities that are
Chris, mute your phone.
Bunch of changes.
I guess I was going to ask the question while we were here, if we could possibly align better with the state as they're changing things. And if we're talking specifically about the waste portion, I do believe it's a burden on some of the larger cultivations in Anchorage. And it's also a risk, you know, these root balls cause molds and things to grow pretty quickly. So if we could get the waste one through a little quicker, I think that would keep them on the same playing field with the rest of the cultivators. You know, I just think it would help, but then, you know, maybe at some point we could talk about aligning more with the state, because there's a couple other regulations that are going to come into effect in the 90-day period that I'm interested in as a business owner, that I would like to have the same benefits in Anchorage as my partners and the rest of the state.
Okay. Boris?
So I'd certainly be willing to use an ordinance. I mean, if it's a simple ordinance, I'll do it tomorrow. And if it's is it as simple as taking the word roots out of number 1? So marijuana plant waste, including stalks, leaves, and stems. So you remove roots, and then it's not defined as marijuana plant waste, and then the rest of it doesn't apply. Am I misreading it?
I think you're reading it correctly, Forrest.
Yep. Dean, what do you think?
Yeah, it seems like it's me.
Is there
I
any
would take a closer look.
Is there any portion of the root that is not the quote root ball? So if we take the generic term root out, is there any part of the marijuana plant that actually we should be concerned about that will then become not subject to our regulations?
No, I mean, I think everything else is in there. It's pretty well defined. It's just taking out that one piece. I don't think there's anything else.
Again, for a marijuana neophyte, what is there only? Does roots only mean one thing on the cannabis plant? There's one kind of root, it's harmless. Okay.
You wouldn't throw away anything that was useful anyway. I mean, there's real incentive where you would be throwing away roots if there was any reason you could process them.
If I could turn it into something, I'd keep it.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're throwing away as little as you can.
When interpreting an ordinance or state statute, the rules are usually, if it's not defined in the ordinance somewhere, that would be the common meaning of the term. So I guess I'll look up roots and exactly what it means in the common dictionary definition and see if that fits.
We've had this issue, particularly in the marijuana regs, but in some other regulations too, where a list is not inclusive, right? So when we debate, well, is this included, is this not included? So it says marijuana place including stalks, leaves, and stems, right? But someone could easily make the argument there are other things that are marijuana, those are just examples, right?
For example.
That's what that including means, right? Or are we implying this is an exhaustive list?
Yeah, yes, that's how I read it. Sometimes it's clearer when you say includes, but it's not limited to. So if we're going to amend this section, we could add, but not limited to.
Well,
marijuana waste includes, but isn't limited to the following.
My preference would be, because we don't want that actually in this case. My preference would be marijuana plant waste including stalk, leaves, and stems, comma, but not including roots, comma, that have not processed with the solvent. You know what I mean? So we're explicit that the roots are not, you know. And then we have a little part of the law we could drop other things as they occur if there's some other part of the plant that we think can be defined.
That's a great suggestion, Mr. Dunbar. I'll draft it that way. We could say marijuana waste is this list, but it's not included.
Okay.
Well, you know, looking at this, though, it's not processed with solvent, but because you can also blend it. Is it always mixed with solvent?
So I think that refers to like when you take a CO2 machine and you put plant matter in and it rips through the plant matter with CO2, and then that is solvent. So technically, that could be rendered unusable. I think we still, for most people, still mix it and grind it with, you know, compostable material. The solvent means, you know, alcohol, butane, CO2, I guess theoretically butter.
So the point there is that it's been processed and the THC taken out, so you realize there's no point in it.
It's just brown plant matter after that. Just
okay, because I think in case of Alaska Sense, they mixed it with bleach before.
Well, for the root balls, the root balls, because you couldn't grind the root balls because they're so tough.
And that's not what solvent means, so that was a whole different.
Well, it could mean that because it's not really defined. I guess it could mean that.
I think the key word is has not been processed.
Yeah.
Solvent.
Yeah, I think that's
so. You know, when a manufacturer processes it, it basically renders it useless, and they can take it right out of that vessel and throw it in the trash, and it's fine. They don't have to do anything beyond the processing.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
So a manufacturer doesn't have to grind up leaves or whatever after they've taken the THC out?
Not as long as it's been processed with a solvent.
Okay.
Whatever process they use.
So what would it look like? So if it's been processed and it's soaked in this liquid, would it look like a bud? And someone might think, wow, I got this bud and I get to smoke it. I mean,
it'd be brown. It'd be like brown. Most people grind it up because otherwise it's hard to get into like a big nug. You couldn't get into the middle of it usually with a solvent. But most of the time it's trim that they're processing. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense economically to use buds that you could sell as flowers. I don't know. Make me think.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
So the stuff in B tells us what needs to be dealt with under section D. This says B says it must be rendered unusable, and D tells us what that means, right? Is that right? Okay. Anything else? Dean?
I do have a question. So B3 is kind of a catch-all. Otherwise, that's determined by the municipality. And I wonder if any enforcement so far has kind of determined something else is waste that isn't already on the list in B1 and 2. So have you ever had to apply B3 here and determine that something that isn't in 1 and 2 is also waste?
No, I haven't.
But Rich, I think an example of that would be like butter extraction, because once you use butter to extract it, it's not necessarily unusable.
Mhm.
So like something that's like a benign extraction could fall into that catch-all. That's why some people do grind, like still mix it with eggs after they do butter or coconut oil or mixture.
We might ask her.
So this butter is something used to extract?
Yeah, but it doesn't render the plant necessarily completely useless because it's butter, and so it doesn't necessarily pull everything out of the marijuana. So I always tell my clients when it's a benign extraction to still mix and grind, just to be safe. But that's something that could fall in for you.
Yeah, we're just trying to define what butter is. You're talking regular cow butter?
Yeah.
Yeah, just butter, like in a crock pot.
Butter, stick of butter.
In a crock pot, yeah.
Thought maybe it was some new term I hadn't heard.
So
No, just butter.
yeah, like for like 6 hours in a crock pot, and then so that would still technically have some THC left over. You should still grind that.
And so then that butter becomes something you use to make edibles? Is
Yes.
that the deal?
Correct, yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Further new stuff every time.
Yeah.
Very educational.
So
committee.
moving on from this, so
Yeah.
what will end up is B1, remove the word root, and then after stems, say not including roots.
Something like that. I can't remember what I said exactly.
Yeah. I'll send it to you to read first.
Okay.
And what do you want to do with that?
I'll probably.
Amendment? Friday amendment?
You mean the addendum?
Yeah.
Amendment, but an ordinance? 'Cause it's gonna have to be an ordinance, so it'll be introduced and then.
You want to do it Friday?
Let's do it on Fridays.
If Dean can get it in time, otherwise I'll add it to the next meeting's regular agenda.
I don't think that changing this section would fit into the 2 ordinances we have right now.
It'd be a standalone
Scott,
amendment. Yeah.
We could do it Friday.
So yeah, we can get on the. Yeah, we can get it introduced on Friday.
Well,
1080.
Okay.
I'll consider if we can include it in the ordinance that hasn't been submitted for a cease operations order and recent inspections. I don't know.
Well, are we
Change
intending?
the title so it's broader.
Are we intending to submit that for this agenda or next?
No. I don't have any intent. That's up to the committee, which you recommend.
He's working on some other issues for us, because we need to make sure it gets done. Sure. Introduction of the addendum to the agenda.
No, I know.
Well, let's talk about that at the end. We'll add that on. So we want to talk about the status of the failure or refusal of inspection. Let's see what we want to do. That's not ready quite yet.
I think he was talking about adding it to this.
Yeah, 2018-96, is that what we're talking about, added to that?
Yeah. I don't think it fits in the scope of that 21896 ordinance because that's very narrow about transfer of a license.
It does only go to the
But
tribe.
the second draft
Okay, I
one
see.
we have
Right,
is about
right.
inspections, refusals, and changeable.
So, Mr. Chairman, which item are we
Well,
on
to
now?
me,
Okay. So
we can
we
make
are
that
done
one under this
with-
ordinance and include the other stuff since we haven't submitted yet for November 20th. Oops.
My preference would be just to do this one as a small standalone ordinance for this coming agenda.
Okay.
I think that's a lot.
For the addendum tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a small change.
Just one change, yeah.
108740.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so that's B. So let's move back to A. And this regards update the transfers of marijuana licenses. So we introduced last week, 23rd, and knowing that we might have some changes and we can review it here. So we have another document that is my comments only. Is that
Yes.
correct, Dean?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
so I
the
sent
PDF
in some
document.
edits, and then Dean had some comments on those. So I'd like to rework it a little bit and do it as an S version for Tuesday, if we could get some agreement on that. Chris, did you get a copy of this?
Yes.
Okay, it has the comments on the right-hand side.
I don't know if I have that one.
I'll send it right now.
Okay, so I think one point is submitted by, we have Devosky, Dunbar. Do we want more people on this? I think we left that meeting. Peter Dick wanted it.
You could add me to it. I'm voting for it, so okay.
Do you want to be on this too?
Sure.
Okay, and then in E, I had a question on, we have an addition in here that says, well, let's stop. An addition, this is in there currently. The municipal license for a marijuana establishment that ceases to operate as an ongoing business, I'm sorry. The current wording is, the holder of a municipal marijuana establishment license that ceases to operate the business shall surrender the license to the municipal clerk within 10 days. In the version we introduced, adds the phrase at the location for which it is issued. And when I read that, I was thinking, one thing is cease operations. Well, what happens to Alaska Scents? It ceased operations for 30 days because we told them to, right? So do they have to turn it over? We don't, our intent wasn't they would turn their license. The Girdwood retail store, my understanding is going to close for winter. Well, that's ceasing operations in some regards, but you know, they plan on opening it back up. So we don't really, I don't think our intent is to take their license. So I just recommended, I haven't shown it here in any kind of proper form, but just say, what if we change that to the municipal license for a marijuana establishment that ceases to operate as an ongoing business shall become invalid?
Or if we just add permanently ceases to operate. It's just a temporary, but on the original one, maybe just add in the establishment license that permanently ceases to operate has to turn their license in.
Just add the word permanently.
Well, you still have to delete 10 days at the end then.
The issue on the 10 days, if someone shuts it down,
I also don't,
what do they submit? They bring a piece of paper to you?
They're supposed to bring their actual license back.
is that a mirror of state law? I mean, is there something that, why do we
I do
care
not
if
know the
somebody
answer to
stops
that.
for 10 days?
Well, it's just within that 10-day period they need to.
Oh, I'm sorry, within 10
submit.
days they must submit it,
Yeah.
not 10 days like they
Yeah,
get
so if
stopped
they
for 10
cease
days.
to operate within 10 days of ceasing to permanently operate, my understanding is they turn the license back
Gotcha.
into the city.
My kind of thinking about this, okay, so some businesses closing down, why are they closing down? Well, they weren't making any money, they gotta close down, it's chaotic, they have debts to pay, they're thinking about a million different things, they're shutting down the business. They're not thinking, I'm gonna bring this piece of paper to Mandy. So it's unlikely to happen. So then what are you gonna do? And do we care? What we really wanna say is, hey, they shut down, there's nothing in there, it's dark, their valid license is invalid. They don't have to take an additional action, right? I mean, that's kind of our intent. You shut down, it's invalid.
So I think this is for the, and Dean maybe correct me, this is for the transfer. So if they're transferring it, we want to collect the license from the person that is no longer licensed so we can issue the new license to who it's transferred to. Is that
If
right?
they're moving to a different location, yeah.
Well, they can't move to a location, but if, right?
They can't. They have to give you back the piece of paper. I guess. If they're transferring ownership, you need to sort of issue the paper with the new owner's name on it.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's what this language is speaking to you. It's speaking to you that, well, the operations of that establishment ceasing, no more marijuana sales, production, or cultivation, or testing. So I guess it's a little vague as to cease operations. You know, when are they going to cease to operate the business? And I see it as we're no longer going to operate this business, and maybe it's a conscious decision of the owner, and that's kind of more clear as to when that date would be. We're going to shut our doors on, December 1 and stop operating. Of course, they might have their activities where they're wrapping up and selling equipment and, moving stuff out. That's not operating the business, I think. That's not really defined here, so I'm kind of going out the common sense understanding of what that means. I know that I've seen this language in other contexts. I'm not sure if it's in our code for other licenses where you have to return it after you've ceased operations after 10 days. But I guess the vague part is where perhaps they're not operating for some reason for a month or two, but they intended to try to start up. Maybe they need to pay their debts or something like that. And I guess that's where it's more difficult to say this is the date you ceased operations. 10 days after that, it wouldn't really be clear. I'm not sure how you can define that clearly. Perhaps if they haven't operated business as a marijuana establishment for X number of days, then they're determined ceased. We have that in the special land use permit, I think, for marijuana, where the permit expires. They haven't operated for the purposes of the special land use permit for.
It's 120 days?
Yeah, I think that's right. So we could do something similar for this. On the other hand, you could just leave it and do a case-by-case determination, where sometimes it's going to be clear. The owner says, we're stopping on December 1, we're out. And then you say, yeah, give us this says return the license December 10th, the clerk's office. I guess John's concern makes sense. If I were closing up, I wouldn't be thinking about the piece of paper on the wall. I'd be cleaning out my equipment and getting out before I have a holdover lease, tenancy kind of situation. So I don't mean to go on at length, but I think that if we're going to find somebody for not returning after 10 days, that's a little ridiculous. And it would basically just be, hey, you're overdue, give it back, and they do it and they're done. So I'm just kind of speaking theoretically.
And if they're going out of business, they wouldn't be able to pay the fine anyway.
Rich, is your sense, you go by Girdwood and you say, hey, they're shut down, they ceased operation, where's their license?
Maybe they kept it as a souvenir, who cares really,
Jana?
Manny, I think your 10 days, I think you guys took that 10 days from 306-850, but that's for surrender, destruction of license. A license issued under this chapter must be surrendered to an employee of the board on demand if the director or board orders. A license issued under this chapter must be surrendered not later than 10 days after the marijuana establishment loses or vacates a licensed premises. So I think it's when you lose that 10 days about when you lose your premises.
That reminds me that state regulation is also based on our liquor licensing statutes. The state's liquor license has to be renewed after 10 days. So the state marijuana regulations based on that, and I would read our code based on that regulation.
So this 10 days, this statement or phrasing comes from the state regulation?
Well, it's not the same though. It's the 10 days in the state regulations that I'm finding is not if you cease operations, it's if you lose your right to possess the premises. Because the licenses are premises based, so they're tied to the location. That's why you can't move them.
All right, any thoughts, Boris?
I think so we're tremendously simplifying this. We're deleting a lot of verbiage out of this section, which I think is good. And I do prefer your alternate language, although I also agree with Mandy that if you inserted the word permanently before ceases, I think that would be useful. I will say that if you make the change that you're suggesting and delete everything else, then E just says municipal marijuana establishment license is not transferable from the specific location for which it is issued to a different location. Municipal license for a marijuana establishment that's permanently ceased to operate an ongoing business. it becomes one section that doesn't really make sense. It's actually two sections, right? Or it should be 2 bullet points or something, because they're speaking to different things, even though the sentences would immediately follow each other.
Well, you kind of have that already too, in a way. It's not transferable.
Yeah.
Because it, even in its original, current form, it's not handy.
So I think for like processing purposes, I would prefer to be notified by the applicant that they're ceasing operations permanently rather than having something turned into me. And I think for my purposes, that's to notify like me and some of the other departments, just to have everybody on the same page. Hey, this place is shutting down, because I think a lot of times we don't get information at the same time. So as opposed to like physically getting their license back, I would rather they just be required to send notice to the municipality that they're permanently ceasing operations.
What's the enforcement mechanism, though? If they're permanently ceasing operations, then they're just like, peace. I mean, are we going to fine them after the fact? Is there a fine for not doing
You
that?
guys have to be notified, right? For the state license, if they're if they are on their own accord either not renewing, or they have to notify you, or
There is a notification because they want to make sure that all the marijuana products are removed from the premises properly, whether that's transferred out to a different business or it's destroyed. So we've only had a handful. I'm not sure we have good processes in place yet for that, but I do know when a business is closing, enforcement goes out and does an inspection to say, okay, how much product do they have on hand, and what is your plan, right? What are you going to do? You just can't shut your door, chuck it in the dumpster. So.
But it's not really codified in the regulations.
No, that's I think we're dealing with it as it happens. We've only had a handful of businesses not renewed that I'm aware of, and I know each time enforcement went out, and big kind of I don't want to call it a closing inspection because we don't really have one, but that's more or less what it was.
They do have to track the metrics, so it's that would be the trigger.
You see 0 sales would trigger something?
Yeah, or if you see all plant tags that you had get destroyed, enforcement would see that. Like, for example, I have a client in Nome that has a retail and cultivation. He decided the cultivation wasn't worth the bang for the buck because there was plenty of market that he could buy weed from, so he wanted the cultivation to go away. So I couldn't find anything in the regs for a process, so I just called enforcement and said, hey, they're closing the cultivation, mailed the license back, and then they wanted the license mailed back, and then the last 2 weeks of video just for, to make sure nothing weird happened. The enforcement did 1-2 weeks of video. But that was really, other than that, nothing, no forms, no formal process. So you can kind of create your own.
Chris, any thoughts on this so far?
No, thank you.
Do you have so if someone called and said, hey, we're closing down, they tell Mandy, and then Mandy might tell Rich, hey, go check this place out, or what would be the process?
That's what the state does. Basically, I call AMCO and talk to Sarah or Erica and say, hey, this person's closing for XYZ, and then enforcement says, we want either mail license back, and we want X number of video storage, and maybe some business records, and if it's in their area, and I mean, Nome's kind of far away, so they didn't actually physically go there, but they'll physically go if it's closed. So probably the same type of.
So do you have a plan for business that closes?
No, I guess as long as the state group told us there's no product left on site, as far as we would be concerned, it's no longer functioning licensee.
If physically, you would just call them, say, have you heard this is closing, have you inspected? You call someone at the state?
We'd probably, hypothetically, we'd probably call Holscher's group and say, hey, do you have any tags left on site, or is it, or do your record show it's clean? We'd probably go do a sticker head in the door and basically do a log entry for an inspection saying it's closed.
John, how would we deal with your Girdwood issue? If they're just going to suspend operations for a while, they don't need to send their license down.
Well, that's my hope. I would hope that that's my guess is they just are closing down and probably haven't given a moment's thought to seizing. just, let me know, I mean,
Mr. Chair, without a specific, you always go with another code section, to try to establish a precedent. And, there's two other code sections that really basically give us a 365-day window. You have non-conformities. If a non-conforming issue is terminated for a year, they lose that. And also in Title 23, you have a building permit. If you don't have action on that permit within a year, the permit is invalid. So if we ever had to address that in a formal process, those are the two precedents that we would use.
and that's a long time.
A year, right? Yeah, but we have, when we've had issues where a specific code didn't address something and we needed to come up with a date, that's what we've done, and it seems to the courts have accepted that.
And we wouldn't really hit that here because they have to renew anyway. So if they were closed for a year, they just packed up and left, you wouldn't get a renewal. It would be done anyway. So, Lorenzo?
What do you do when like anybody else closes, like alcohol or maybe the Walgreens or drugstore, somebody that has some kind of regulated, if they just packed up and left, have you run into that here, or what do you do?
Mandy?
So the only other licenses that we deal with, we don't have liquor license requirements. We just do reviews of the state liquor licenses. So if they're gone, the state deals with that. But for the businesses that we do license, they just don't renew. So if they stop operating, they just don't renew.
What would be the main concern or the difference between us and them? Is it just our inventory is special, or?
I think because there's so many notices that the clerk's office sends out to different departments, it's just keeping everybody on the same page.
Just curious.
I do, and this is the only reason I know this. I was in the AMCO office when we were discussing the facility here in town. There is a time frame as far as if a business has been active, that the license is invalid. I don't know what the time frame was. This is just overhearing conversation while being in their office, so I'm not sure what the time frame was, but I know they do have a window that it has to be operated if the license becomes invalid.
Okay. Jed, do you know that?
I mean, are you talking about minimum operating requirements?
Yeah,
or?
right.
Right. So, I mean, every alcohol establishment has minimum operating requirements. They have to operate the license for a minimum of 240 hours a year. It used to be 38-hour days. If the license is surrendered, I think there is concern for what happens to that alcohol. Obviously, it couldn't be sold once the license is surrendered. It has to be somehow transferred back into a distributor, I believe. But I mean, they can't have a garage sale after they've surrendered their alcohol license. That would be selling alcohol without license.
Right.
But we don't have the same requirement for marijuana. If you don't have the 240 hour.
Right, there's no minimum operating requirements.
Which is probably
Do you, so there are none officially for marijuana. Are you acting on, are you looking at metrics saying, hey, they got 0 sales for a month and taking action or calling them?
I mean, I can't comment on what the enforcement team's methods for investigating are, but I know that I think the board has issued or approved licenses that were never then issued because they just couldn't get their business off the ground. I think, like you said,
it's probably a conversation you heard that, there's some licenses that have been
approved basically for a year, and they've never opened, so they've never been issued the license. But at what point do we say you're never going to operate, and I guess expire the license or well, it was just never issued. I don't know. We have a bunch of businesses that are stuck in that right now that, this is very expensive and very daunting to get a business open. And, you get a license and 12 months later you haven't opened. I think right now we review those at every board meeting. We've got 15 or 20, but we haven't really made a decision on as a board of what the plan would be. So that's probably the conversation that you heard about. But right now, someone could, if my business is open and I decided I wanted to take a 3-month break or take a 3-month something to fix something, I could literally close my doors for 3 months, open it back up without any notifications to anybody. You know, they may see some odd transactions, like no transactions, and call me and ask me what's going on. But you know, I know cultivations that have dealt with mold and bug issues, and they basically went in and cut down everything, destroyed everything, and it takes months, you know, sometimes 5 to 6 months to actually have a new product that you can get out the door. So, you know, there's just so many instances where you could be open but not really making money.
Okay, thank you. So, we got several things here, and it's after 10. Let's.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
If I could add one more thing, if you want. I just looked up the liquor license surrender under state statute. It's fairly short. If I can do that real quick.
Please.
So, a surrender instruction of the state liquor license is under AS 04-11580. A license issued under the establishment of the board so directs be surrendered on demand of a peace officer, agent, or officer of the board. So if the board decides to they demand it, then it must be surrendered. And B, the licensee shall surrender a current license to the board within 10 days after the loss or vacation of the licensed premises. So it's kind of like Mandy was saying, this section we're looking at is just about leaving that site, those premises, 10 days after vacate. So
Okay.
that's very similar.
So that's I mean, but we don't have to conform to that at all, really. So let me put out some new wording then. Skipping what I suggested and saying perhaps we would go, the holder of a municipal marijuana establishment license that permanently ceases to operate the business at the location for which it is issued shall send notice to the municipal clerk within 10 days.
So we want them to send the certificate.
It's just a piece of paper that could have Xeroxes.
I think it's just helpful to know that they're closing.
That would meet your needs, man.
I think it would be helpful. I mean, I don't necessarily need them to mail back the license, but it's helpful because we send notice to like APD and some different departments that kind of monitor like for retail taxes and you know stuff like that. So just to make sure that everybody knows a specific date, it just kind of it helps with processing.
So the notice is, I mean, this certificate is, like I get a business license from a business, I just get a PDF, I'm gonna do it online,
Mhm.
print that out, I can print out 30 of them. I mean, the piece of paper is critical, right?
No.
So we don't want any,
No.
Right? Mr. Chair?
Yes.
If I may. The process for alcohol licensing, the actual physical license itself can be important at times because sometimes there are conditions on that license that are printed on the back of the license.
Right.
That an enforcement officer or some other type of inspection may go to the license and then look on the back and see whether those conditions are being followed. I think there's also just that explicit clarity that the business is either allowed to operate or not allowed to operate based on whether they're holding that license. And so if they surrender the license, then it's explicitly clear to the licensing agency and the licensee that they are no longer operating. Whereas if they held on to that license and just made a phone call or sent an email in, you know, there could be some sort of miscommunication along the way, saying, "Oh, well, we thought we were still allowed to operate until the end of the month," or.
but they could, I mean, it's just a piece of paper though. I mean, they could print out another one, they want to trick Mandy, they'll say, "Oh, mail this in to her, but we're gonna leave it on the wall and keep going," you know?
The alcohol licenses, at least, they can't just, I mean, they would have to forge it, but our office prints out the license and sends it to the licensee.
And it has
It's
some
not-
substance
we don't
to
email
it.
it to them, you know.
It's not like off my inkjet.
I mean, they could do that, but.
Is that what we do for marijuana? Is it something?
We do print it in the office, yeah.
Okay, well, I
Is it
guess
on
if they.
regular paper or is it some special
It's
texture?
a special carton.
So what's the sense here? Just leave it. I think it'd be valuable to put permanent thesis or something to clarify what would be there. But
Right.
are we okay just they bring in their license? They could.
Whenever you being on the subject of licenses, I was always curious. Other states are doing it. Are you guys ever going to limit the amount of licenses within a city?
No.
You have no plans on doing something like that?
No, that would create a secondary market.
What does that mean?
We'll create a secondary market like in taxis or alcohol. I think the hope is it'd be like coffee shops. The market will take care of it.
You wouldn't be afraid of actually crashing the marijuana market by doing that?
I'm not afraid of crashing the coffee shop market.
At this point, this has been discussed. People.
I was just curious. I never firsthand.
It hasn't gotten traction.
We've discussed that. The problem is the state's not restricting the licenses they're selling. The state's going to sell the money licenses that people ask for. And that's a burden you guys take when you get in that business. There's no finite amount of licenses. The person next to you could apply for a license to open up the same operation you do. There's nothing, from what I've seen, the state's got in place to reduce the amount of licenses going into production.
I'd like to move on from that topic because we need to go through here, and that's a big topic that
of course, it's
a little bit off the agenda. Not that it's not important. Okay, so let's look at this. Perhaps we say the holder of a municipal marijuana establishment license that permanently ceases to operate, and then leave the rest like it is in what we introduced last week.
And if we're consistent with the state, I like that. I mean, if they have to do it with the state, they can do it with us too.
Okay. Okay. So moving on, we have just at the top of page 2, 10.80.045. I wanted to make a little more clear what this section was about because it starts looking redundant with the next section. So this section regards application for license transfer. And is it okay to have that phrasing in front of it?
Yes, I think that makes sense.
Is that proper phrasing for it?
I believe so, yeah.
Any issues on that? Okay, and then on page 2, that section B, exceptions, Dean had some new wording, and I just, really just for edit. I think there are some extra words there.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with those two sheets. Those look good to me.
Okay, anything from committee? Chris, are you able to follow?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay, and then I'd recommend on page 3, section C2, we talk about that if a license or ownership is changed, that they have to give us under oath a list of all their debts. And I was puzzled by that. I mean, I didn't understand the purpose for our needs. You know, debts would be, I mean, most of us, I have a huge amount of debts at any moment because I pay my vendors on debt 30, you know, it's not any problem. But I don't want to list for anyone all my suppliers. We don't do that as a small business, right?
Yeah.
And so there's no benefit for us. I don't see any for the city side. But for business, you don't tell your suppliers. It's one of our things. So I'm not comfortable that there's a reason for this. Dean had mentioned that it goes, the changes I recommend, which is deleting that section, would go beyond the title, and that would have to be a separate action. Is that correct?
Well, the title was just about allowing you to transfer, and the title was already published out there.
Sure.
So this isn't, this statement here is under application for transfer, but I think that we also have a similar statement elsewhere in code, I think that you identified that wasn't about transfers itself. I think we could, it might be okay to include, but I believe that C2, that whole paragraph, is also similar to state regulation. And that's why it was there in the first place.
I wonder, Jed, do you deal with this at all? This aspect? I mean, if they transfer a license, they tell you all the debts.
Well, on the alcohol side, for sure. I mean, those debtors may have liens on the license that could inhibit the transfer of that license.
But if they had a lien on the license, that would be filed with AMCO.
Right.
Yeah. When we do, and I've done quite a few of these transfers for the state, it's creditors that are not in good standing, like people that you owe money to that you don't have like a payment plan or solution worked out for, that you're in default. That's how I interpret it, because otherwise you list them like your mortgage, and that doesn't make any sense.
So I don't think, I mean, I accept with Dean that we should not deal with it with this particular ordinance, but maybe think about it for later.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll leave that alone. Are there any thoughts on that, though? I mean, if we forward to something that pulled out that information? Or that requirement?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we need to list debts.
Okay, the next, on page 4, and this is just a matter of timing. And it's more of a question, I guess I didn't have a, in section A, a licensed marijuana establishment shall, before or not later than 10 days of the effective date of an agreement or contract for an ownership change as described in this section, report the change on a form. So this is if they're going to have an ownership change. I'm sorry, I missed one thing, the very bottom of page 3. Just a suggestion for changing the title, and I recommend adding reporting of ownership changes. Just to make very clear what that section is. Any comments on that?
I don't think that makes
Dean's
sense.
okay with that? Okay, sorry, back to 4. So now in this case, the licensed marijuana establishment has some changes in ownership, and 10 days before they have an agreement with their owners or a new owner and say, we're going to do this, they tell Mandy with 10 days notice, but the process is they have to come to us, so get it on our schedule, we notify community councils. We're inclined that you can make this deal, and it's effective with some new owners, and it's effective in 10 days. But the reality is, it's a minimum 30-day process, right? If you notify the community councils, if you're less than 30 days, they're mad because they don't meet. You get at least 30 days. And then they get on our schedule is minimum 2 weeks.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead, Dean.
if I recall the process for transferring a non-controlling interest, less than 50%, that it's just reported and that's it. And on renewal, you will have a lot more information about the change. So this section 46 is more about transfers of non-controlling interests, and that's just a form to report who's going to submit it to the clerk. It doesn't go, I think, for somebody's approval. So that's why 10 days here makes sense. Now, if it's a controlling interest or the transfer of the whole license itself, that's what 45 is intended to cover. And that's what 46B is trying to say. If it's more than 50% or it's the whole license, then you need to do process under 45, which would be, it doesn't have that 10-day thing, it's got that new sentence saying, regardless of whatever agreement you have for transferring or controlling interest with the license, it's not going to be effective until the assembly approves it. So that's at page 3, new sentence on C. So it doesn't have that 10-day sort of thing. So the purpose of 10 days is, don't do it until it's reported, it's got to happen, it's effective. And if you violate that, there's a fine for that. If you've gone ahead and made an agreement for effective transfer before you've reported it. So I hope that makes sense. That's also why here in A, I don't think we should add that sentence about regardless of any private agreement terms. At line 11, that's if it's a controlling interest for transfer of license in 45, requires the Assembly's approval. So this non-controlling interest transfer doesn't. So I wouldn't put one sentence in here in the middle there.
Well, it's, yeah.
John, why would you even want to let community councils know about transfer of ownership? It's not adding another facility in the community council boundaries. All it's going to do is confuse community council center members.
Why is that standard? It's not standard now for a change of controlling interest to go to a community council.
So just the report of a change of ownership, we don't typically send notice to the community councils. It's only items that go before the assembly. So transfers of controlling interest or the transfers of the license if this is passed.
So to Dean's point on A, this whole section 46 is reporting of ownership changes, non-controlling, also controlling interest. So it's not clear in A, it's only for non-controlling interest, is it?
I agree. This section could be clearer without.
Can we add here then in A on line 7, before the word ownership, non-controlling ownership change?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would that make it clear?
I believe so. Mandy, if you think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then don't add what I added in there. Or suggested. Okay, Corey? Chris? Following that?
Yes.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that? It's just to clarify in that section A on page 4. Just to say
Yes.
non-controlling ownership. Dick? Pete?
Good.
Okay, so let's make that change. Pete.
Okay.
And not add the regardless of any private interest section. Okay, and then on page 5, line 38, change the word shall or will to may. And the point there is, if it's a transfer, we won't be going over this land use permit. So there really is none to connect. And we actually stated earlier that we won't.
Mr. Chair, this sentence, where you want to change from will to may, it actually is, it refers to the first sentence, which is only about new applications for a new license. And a new application and new license, it requires the special land use permit for marijuana. And then the third sentence that starts after that one at the end of line 41, that's the Assembly may hold a hearing, you already have the discussion, or may to a certain direction to an application for a renewal or transfer. And so it doesn't combine, that's kind of two separate terms of holding a public hearing. New application, you will hold one. Renewal or transfer, the Assembly may hold one. I've read this section a bunch of times in the past to clarify what that meant.
Okay, so will, so maybe will is more appropriate. That's what we've been doing.
I think
Thoughts
so.
on that, then? So we should leave it will.
Okay.
Okay, so no change. All right, thank you. Is there anything else on page 6? That's the change I had recommended on page 6 around line 31 regards that debts section again that we kind of agreed we'll deal with separately. And this would be presumably to delete the phrase connection on debts and then specify we're worried about municipal taxes and not state taxes. That's for the state to worry about. So I think I'll ask Dean to prep something to get rid of that requirement to submit the debt information and tidy this up so it specifies municipal taxes. We'll deal with that later. I don't think it's a huge rush.
No, you don't want that for the addendum tomorrow, I
No.
hope. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all I had on
Be
here.
working all night, Dean.
What nights are for? Okay, so are we comfortable with those two changes to make this an S version for Tuesday?
So this is up for public hearing on Tuesday?
I think the changes are fairly
Wednesday.
minor
Yes.
as far as public testimony.
Wednesday.
The key issue is we'll parallel the state's rules with transfer to license, right?
So we'll have an S version in public hearing and that would.
Any thoughts? You're pointing, Jen?
Just for page 4 on C, for C2, it's like a limited liability company and changing the identity of its members. So kind of remember, you also want to include managers in that, managers of the LLC. Like if it's a managed LLC, manager managed LLC, then that's who directs the company, who controls it. Decision makings and who can bind the company would be if it's a manager managed LLC. Remember, that's why I think we talked about this a little bit before last time.
It's not really, they may have control, but it's still, I don't know, it's not really attached to the license,
The state
right?
just changed it.
We're talking about owners.
Because I think, okay, well, the state just changed it because of the Alaska Sense issue. They added managers as part of, changing because if you added them as a licensee because they're controlling the company, right? They're directing the operations, they're binding the company to contracts and stuff. But if you don't think that is necessary, that's totally fine with me.
Dean?
Could I ask you, Ms. Watson, so can an LLC be formed where you have a designated managing member who owns only about 10% actually?
They don't even have to own
of the
anything.
LLC?
So they don't have to own anything. So we filed one for Lorenzo because we added him as a manager. So we also filed a report with the Muni to add him because my understanding is that is a direct interest because you have control of the company. You're able to make decisions on behalf of the company. But it's up to you. It's up to you guys.
And we do see that with the liquor licenses. So any of the licensees or affiliates for the liquor licenses, you'll see 0% holders listed because they are like managing officers.
I think the question for the comedy is, do you want a managing member who doesn't have a controlling ownership, but who's a designated managing member to be approved by the assembly before that change, or just reported?
Just reported.
I think to muddy the issue we're dealing with here, we do, but this is where we deal with checking criminal records and so on, correct? Is in this section.
So if you had a manager of an LLC that had 0% ownership and you didn't check their criminal records, theoretically they could be, a criminal directing the marijuana company, which wouldn't be good.
But the owners would still be liable.
Sure. Oh, the state just made this change, so if you guys don't want to do it, the state has, then they require us to do it on the state side anyway, so it's fine.
Did the state already make the change?
That's right, it's not effective yet.
No,
but
it
it's-
is. It went
It
came effective August 11th.
I'm sorry, it did come effective already, I apologize.
Is that, we got a whole list of new changes that were made and considered, and is that on an overt list? Because we're going to go through the recent changes and look at our rules and see if we should make changes, so maybe that's the time.
Yeah, maybe that's a good time.
It's part, so that'll be on the list, we can go through.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so this will be a new, with those few changes, a new effort to go forward on Tuesday. Okay, good, thank you.
Did the comedy want to vote on a recommendation for the S version? Or?
Do you want to do that?
I'm not on the committee.
Here, we got no committee. Any recommendations on the S version?
Just move to recommend to Assembly the S version.
Okay. Second for Pete.
Change it.
Any opposition? Chris? Mr. Constant?
What was that, John?
We're just committee recommendation on the S version of this AO 2018-96.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, so we're at 10:28, and we have B and D, fines and odor, to talk about. Dean, did you have something on fines? Well, I guess I should talk to the people who are here. Do you want to postpone these things or continue through? See how far we get in a half hour or so?
Half hour.
15 minutes? Give me a number. 10 minutes. How long will it take to go through the fines? Did you have something for us there?
So I provided the fines as kind of a bigger discussion. There was talk on it at the last committee meeting about a few adjustments that involved code enforcement. And so this is kind of just to give you the scope of all of the fines that are involved with marijuana, and to see if there was any other desired changes. If that's one that's going to be addressed, we can see if there's others that you want to address at the same time.
Okay, because what triggered this was looking at refusal of inspection. We said we're going to look at all those. The refusal of inspection we'll look at later in November. Can we postpone this then? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that okay with the committee?
So are these fines already, so this isn't changes?
No, this is what is current code for all of the fines. And so this is what you would have to adjust or add or change if you desired to.
If I may, I think it's a good idea to review them all as they currently are, because the waste disposal issue and the inspection issue in past months, I would thought that the fine would just be $100 or something minimal. So in that draft ordinance, we're changing it to a $2,000 fine for refusing inspections. So I'd like to study it and list them all and see if there's others that the committee felt should be increased because of the gravity of the offense.
Okay, and Rich, so you have any thoughts on fines? We'll deal with it later. But
Yeah, the way I looked at it a little bit, the fines are in here are what they are, and if we have a problem with the product, if it's just some one-time small issue, it's not a huge deal. But you guys are going to hear about it anyway. So if there's a pattern, if we have a licensee who is having problems, it's going to be brought to your attention. So you guys will have the opportunity to act on it if it's something that's not being corrected.
So is there a sliding scale for the fines that you guys use if it's a multiple offense? Is it after the third offense of the same kind, the fine increases?
It's specified in the fine schedule.
Okay, they do that per fine.
There are, and then if there are some issues that are in there that there's not a specific fine for, so we go back to the preamble of Title 10, that's where we pulled the $1,000 fine from. So if there's not a specified fine, it's going to be $1,000.
So there might be something somewhat minor that isn't specified, and all of a sudden.
Well, I think there's a scale there too. I think there's the $1,000. I think there's also a $300. I think that there's a $300 option. There's definitely a lesser option.
Okay. So we'll review those, come with our thoughts next month.
Okay.
That works. Okay, so odor regulations in B. And I guess our main work product here is what Jana has provided. And Jana, you provided a summary, and then you have details of these things too.
Yeah, and Mandy, let me know that my revised attachments didn't come through. So there was a matrix from a different state that went to, intent. Well, getting back to fines, but also intent of what steps you've taken to remediate the problem and whatnot. I don't know if we're gonna be able to go through that in 15 minutes. It might. I have a little short issue that's not on the agenda. if you want to fill 15 minutes.
Well, I appreciate all your work on this, because it's helpful that you do our work for us, so, and anyone else who
Bill
wants to
Billy
do
would
that is really
appreciate that.
great, so.
I wanted Mandy to have the full set of documents though that was supposed to go along with that before we really went through it, and I guess it didn't come through when I sent it. Probably use it there.
So these are from the
One-
previous
yeah.
meeting, and she edited them. So
I added more stuff that we don't have now because it didn't come through. But I mean, we could go through it just in general.
Give us an overview so we can think of it, and maybe to start, so Rich, your sense on our current rules is what?
I've had a discussion with Jack, my boss, and I also had a discussion with Chief Bolsher at AMCO this morning about the current codes, and we're actually quite happy with what we've got. The state code is actually a bit more restrictive than ours. We have two sections that address odor, Title 10 and Title 21. Title 10 is in line with the state, which says outside of the building or outside of the facility. And we have an issue. There's a little problem with us using that one, so we don't use it. Title 21 says at the property line, and the state Director McConnell has directed the AMCO enforcement guys. That's what they're going to use to be consistent with the municipality. Which, as an enforcement guy, I love consistency. That makes life a lot easier. With what we think, what we've got is workable. We have an internal policy of how we're doing it now, and I think if that was to be codified, I think it would be fine because Mr. Frost has got about another 2.5 years here. I've got 5, so we're leaving. So if something was actually put in code, it would, it would outlast us. But what we're doing now as policy, the internal policy, is if we're going to issue any type of enforcement action for an order, there has to be 2 officers present. And we've learned, thanks to Ms. Fulton in hearings, we've kind of refined it as far as the data we collect on site. We really make a good effort to wind direction, type of wind, to verify where it's coming from. What we're going to be doing now is the 2 officers have to stay on site for 15 minutes. It's not just going to be a drive-by, oh, I got a whiff of something, or we're going to stay on site and you're going to verify, okay, did the winds change, did it gusting? So it's basically building our case is what we're doing. We're not going to do a citation that we can't win. So I think that will be better. And the other thing that we're going to do that we haven't always done, we probably should have, is we're going to do a knock or get a contact the licensee on site and say, you've got an odor issue right now, and this is what's going on. And part of that would be the big thing there would be to make the licensee aware of it, because we understand that there are different processes and there's different phases of the grow cycles that will put out more odor or stronger odor. So that would allow them to address it internally. When I mean internally, inside their facility, so that way they would know, okay, wow, when I'm doing this, we really need to make sure our filters are new or something like that. And also with the 15-minute rule, what we've also discovered is nothing in the law says these buildings have to be a space shuttle and airtight. But the problem is, well, it's not really a problem, it's just it's reality, is when you open doors, they're pressurized, it's a warm moisture, so it's going to purge. So we found that out with Great Northern. When we were going for another meeting, we found an odor at Great Northern. When we follow-up investigation showed it's their lunch hour when they go to lunch. So they had 20 people coming and going, like a half-hour window. So there's no way to prevent it. I mean, unless you're going to have a vapor lock inside a door. So we acknowledge that as being that there is going to be escape of some odor. So that hence the 15 minutes on site, so we're not just gonna go by and say, oh, I've got a, odor in the street outside of licensee X. We're gonna say, okay, is it still there 15 minutes later? Or was, did a half a dozen people leave 15 minutes prior to us getting there? So in essence, we like what we've got. We think it's workable, and with our policies, I think we're addressing the issue, and I think it's allowing us to build a case if we need be, but I think it also protects the licensee as far as making sure it's not just a very short-term anomaly as far as the odor goes.
Okay, so just to recap then, so we have rules in Title 10 and also Title 21. Title 10 is at the building, you're not using that. Title 21 is at the property line, and that's what you're using.
Yes.
So we should make some changes then, because you're not really doing what's in Title 10.
I think Title 10 should reflect the same as Title 21. The issues with Title 10 is the wording. It basically says unless the special land use permit allows, and what most of them say is that if there's a odor issue, the licensee needs to do some upgrade on their ventilation, something to that effect. So it basically real subjective, and it's nothing that we can really hold down. So we're comfortable with that, the property line.
Okay. Gord?
No, I have nothing. I appreciate that revising Title 10 to look like Title 21. I think I've expressed before that I grew up in Cordova where there are fish processors, and the whole town smells like fish guts for a portion of the summer, and people continue with their lives. So, I understand that it's annoyance for some people, but I am not. I prefer that we not come down very, with a hammer every time with odor violations, because odors are a fact of life. I get that's what the title says, but if there's a way to make it a little more flexible, I support that.
And I would say I like what enforcement's been doing lately with, I think we should codify, because Rich pointed out they're not going to be here forever. You have to have 2 officials on site smelling it, be there for 15 minutes. Because we were getting violations for people just driving past the facility, and that's kind of like, who is that? And then, Denver has this really cool thing in their draft where it outlines metrics that need to be achieved before a violation is actually issued. Like, there has to be 5 complaints from 5 different individuals or businesses, because a lot of times it'll be complaints just from like one really nitpicky person. And if it's really just bothering one person in the neighborhood, it's not affecting everybody else, like, is that a reasonable metric? Maybe 5 is too high for us because we're a smaller population base in Denver. Maybe something like 2 complaints from 2 different people in a 30-day period, or a shorter period, a week or something like that. Yeah, and so that sounds good. But I think we do need to make some of those things that enforcement has been doing to decrease the subjectivity of it into the actual law. Because otherwise it just really doesn't protect licensees, if you don't have 2 officers on site and you're not using wind metrics and whatnot, licensees get kind of hammered, or have gotten hammered, not as much recently.
Mr. Chair?
Chris?
Yeah, on that topic, I think under the section 880 of the code where we do fines for excessive calls for police, there is some precedent in there somewhere for the calls have to come from multiple parties.
Before it triggers the fine. So if you okay. So Executive Dean,
We might want to look at Title 17 also, animal noise, because you've got to have so many instances of animal noise, because some people at the Bronx once complain about it. We need to look at what we've got in Title 17 into that, see how that applies to this.
We would change that too.
I know we need to see what we did there and be consistent with our conversation.
okay, so 1 complaint and then for grants. Okay.
Mr. Crane through the chairs, that's where we actually got the idea from for the 15 minutes as far as the consistent barking.
17.
Yeah, so we figured, okay, 15 minutes, you know, kind of parallel that would be a good, it would be a good set time that, you know, whether we would document we were there, this is when we got there, this is the minimum, we were there, and you know, if there was, the owner was present during that time, or in understanding that with the shifting wind, you may have to move a little bit, but that's one thing we're monitoring, would be monitoring while we were there, wouldn't be any wind shifts.
Okay. So are you, what's your sense on, 'cause, I mean, we can say you need X number of complaints, but you'll go by checking anyway. I mean, generally code enforcement is complaint driven, but you were going by without complaint and checking places, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the number of complaints isn't relevant if you choose to, I'm gonna inspect this place tomorrow.
Right. Right now, if I was driving down the road and I passed a place that I know is a cultivation facility, and I got odor, I would stop and go, hey, you know, what's going on? You know, and if it was something like, oh, we just have the back door open for this or for that, you know, common sense applies, you know.
Can I ask a weird question? Do we do any kind, I think the answer is no, but do we do any kind of, like, for your position, do you have any qualifications for, like, required to be, like, for the military, I have to take vision and hearing tests.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have to take any kind of test for this? I mean, the next guy after you retire, if we hire someone who has a, you know, an unusually poor sense of smell or an unusually good sense of smell, is that going to impact the amount of enforcement we have in town?
That's why we do too. That was the whole thing. So I've got a compromised odor. I mean, I can smell, but you know, I've had issues, sinus issues through my life, and then, but we have. I know one other person in our office and they had, you know, they had a sense of smell like a dog. It seems like, you know, so that's why we came up with the whole thing of the 2 people. So because the code says normal, you know, I mean, so the goal is 2 officers, you know, at the property line. Is that certain? Is that the smell of marijuana? And how do we know what marijuana smells like? Well, we've all been in the facilities, so we know what cultivated marijuana smells like. And you have 2 people, so if you have one says, you know, I smell marijuana, and the other says, I smell something, but I'm not sure. That's not something we would go forward with. I mean, we have to be positive, you know, of what smelled, and that's why with the 2-person kind of the 2-man rule. You know?
But don't we only have, how many code enforcement officers do we have?
7 of us.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
7 of us, and we could pull in, you know, need be sometimes. In this case, it could be a right-of-way officer too, and some of those guys have been in the facilities also.
Okay, thank you. Dick? Chris, anything on odor at this point?
No, there's nothing actionable right now, so I'll stand by.
I would just say, you know, it would be a helpful chart to look at, and I just don't know what handouts you have, but it's the one on the nuisance odor report. It's got DEQ on the front of it. And it's page 10 of that document. It goes DEQ nuisance odor report. It's from 2014, State of Oregon. Looks like this on the front. You might not. You have that in front? Oh, that looks very. Yeah, go to page 10 of the one Forrest has. And it's got like a fragrance and a matrix that might be helpful, like for code enforcement. Like, is it, you know, unpleasant? Is it really? Is it just a trace? Is it noticeable? Is it moderate? Because a lot of times your reports have that. They have like trace of odor.
That's the problem. The problem is for us to be subjective. For one person, is it trace, or one person is it strong?
But you guys would both be there, and you could both make your numbers and put it in your report. I mean, it's just an idea.
I like simple, and I think where we're at right now is just kind of simple. It doesn't get us in the matrix. It's simple in the time. The time that would be necessary is minimal. And that's one issue with us. I mean, our tasking is, is kind of heavy as it is, not just marijuana, but other things, so, we don't like to lose any more time than we need to, and still do an effective job.
How many, we hear complaints about odor. What's your sense? This is a big problem? It's not really a big problem? It's a big problem with a few that most are just fine?
I think when initially the really two facilities were having difficulties, but now they were having more. Let me phrase this. There were two facilities that were having a difficult time getting it under control. And right now, it appears that both of them have gotten to that point. We've had other facilities that have had other issues that were brought to our attention. Excuse me. And their issues were fixed by additional filtration, or one of them they had their filters had burned out, the scrubber had burned out, so ML&P was getting some odor across the street. We've got one that we're looking at right now that Mr. Rivera brought to our attention, and we haven't got an odor issue from the licensed facility, but we know somebody else in the neighborhood is growing. So I don't know if it could very well be just a personal grow. So we're trying to pin that pin that down, but we haven't gotten any solid evidence that odor is coming from that particular licensee's facility. And they have been one of their other cultivation facilities was the one that had a scrubber burnout, and they addressed the issues as quickly as we could have asked for.
Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we need to hurry here. Okay, what I put forward then is continue the odor discussion, and either perhaps Dean, could you look at making Title 10's odor requirements match Title 21, and then including wording that matches the policy that they're going by.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I made a note to myself to start a draft on that, and perhaps can have it ready for the next meeting in 2 weeks.
Is it 2 weeks again, or do we have a license up?
We don't have any licenses to review, but we have the meetings scheduled. So our next one, I'm trying to see what November is, it would be in 2 weeks.
15th.
And then
Yeah.
another one later?
Yeah, we're scheduled through the end of the year currently, and so they're scheduled for every Tuesday prior to an assembly meeting. So you can cancel, Thursday before an assembly meeting. So you can cancel ones that you don't want, but you have them scheduled.
So is there one for like the last Thanksgiving? No, is that an issue? So is there one the last week of Thanksgiving?
I don't think we had it on Thanksgiving.
No, it's the week. I think it's the week after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, I'd say skip the next meeting. Let's do at the last meeting. We can look at the fines, the rules for refusal of an inspection, and then also continue the odor discussion. And then I think that making things conform with the state law changes could wait until December. We know exactly where they are. We'll have a bunch together, and we can get into that will and shall.
With the exception of the root ball thing, which we'll
Right.
have,
The root ball.
have for
Tuesday.
Tuesday.
We're going to move
Tomorrow.
through quickly. Yeah.
So what date would that meeting be? I'm sorry.
The first one in December.
Is that, we don't have one the last week of
29th of November.
There's
So
nothing the
I
last
don't
week
have my
of
phone with
November.
me.
Which meeting is that?
This committee.
So it would be the 15th.
November 15th? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the
Well,
next
that's
one.
the next one. He's just skipping that one, so the one after that would be the 29th of November.
Yeah, I have one on the 29th.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll skip the 15th. that work? Chris, does that work? So we'll skip the meeting on the 15th, and on the 29th, we'll address, continue with the odor discussion. We'll look at fees and fines, and we'll look at proposed changes for refusal and inspection.
So I will be out of state at that time and not participating, but please continue.
You could call in, we won't know.
Never gonna happen. I'll be on vacation.
There's no vacation from the assembly, Chris.
What's with that? Okay.
It's done your
We'll miss your
contract.
input. We'll try to make sure Amy can make it. Okay, so is there anything else? Audience participation? Dean?
For tomorrow's ordinance on the roof change, sponsors are Mr. Dunbar and
Myself.
To the committee.
Committee.
Whatever you want.
Sam, Sans it without it, Amy.
Okay.
She might like.
The clerk will limit us to 2 sponsors for the introduction motion, so.
Any one of us three would be fine.
Or we
Okay.
can pick one up once they're reduced on the floor. You can always pick up a third one then.
Okay. Anything else?
Move to adjourn.